Okay, we're starting here on in chapter 11 of module 7 for the stockholders equity, and I'm beginning with number 2. With number 2, these are not difficult. If you've watched the lecture and did our practice, these aren't difficult extras. On number 2 here, the only thing that's going to be difficult when you're doing these in the homework or in any of the practice is paying a close attention to the wording. If it's par value, if it's no par, or if it is, in this case, this one here, no par, this one is 50 preferred. It's just making sure it's called the right name. So this one, okay, let's look at number 1. Record the issue of 4,000 shares at $5 par for $35,000 cash. Okay, so they go and just tell you how much you brought in, 35,000. We're bringing in common stock, but look at all the different common stocks there are. We want to pick the one that says $5 par value. 4,000 times $5 each. That, if you do the math, that's 20 grand. And then they call it, instead of, I use the term additional paid in capital. The book just used paid in capital. Make sure you pick the right one. So paid in capital of par value, don't use the stated value. That's the only difference here. That's because this one's dealing with par. For number 2, they're telling us here that they have 2,000 shares of no par stock in exchange to their promoters. What this means is basically as a thank you for helping us set up the business. And what you call that, instead of getting cash, because they're not paying us cash, they're basically giving us their labor. We call that an organization expense. So we had a value of all of their donated time of, it's not donated, we're giving them stock. Organizational expense of 40 grand. And then the stock has a $1 per share stated value. So I'm going to do common stock, $1 stated value. And that's going to be $1 times the number of shares, so 2,000 shares. The rest would be the paid in capital in excess of the stated. So this time we do want to use this one. And that would be the 38 grand. So that's what you just got to look for on these. This one again would be, this one has, oh, let me show you this one. This one has no stated value and it's also no par. So we have the same debit, the organizational expense, 40 grand. But if it has no stated, no par value, the common stock is simply all of it. Common stock, no par. Let me try to pick the right one. No par, yep. Common stock, no par is just the full 40. There is nothing to go to additional paid in capital. So we can check the work here, and I know I didn't do the last one, but this one, the only thing different is it's preferred stock. So you just got to pick the one that's preferred. Okay, so that's, just make sure you look at the wording closely, and then if it has no par value, no stated value, then all of it goes to common, nothing but additional paid in capital. Okay, the next one I wanted to look at is number 4. Okay, with number 4, we're going to have to kind of get these numbers either memorized or we need to jot them down somewhere. There's different stuff that's going on that we're going to need to do the requirements down below. All right, so our stock is currently at $62 a piece per share before any stock dividend or split. It tells us here that we have $10 par value stock. Right now we have 50,000 shares that are outstanding. So that's how they get the 500,000, 50 times 10. The rest of it that the people paid over and beyond the 10 bucks, the 200,000, and then we got our retained earnings. All right, assume the company declares and distributes a 50% stock dividend. That's huge. Remember, I said in the lecture, if it's over 25%, you base the value of the dividend on the par. And if it's under 25%, then you base it on the value of the stock at 62. But this one's over 25, so we're doing it on the par value. And it tells us here, like I had said in the lecture, that we're just going to put it right into retained earnings. We're not even going to worry about the dividend account. So let's look at this. It says we're going to complete this little chart on what happens to the value of our common stock. What may help here is to do a little journal entry and maybe even have our T accounts up. Otherwise, you need to do this off on a side sheet of paper. I'm just going to do it here so you can see it. So if we issue a new dividend here, we're going to debit our retained earnings because we're issuing a dividend, but we need to figure out how much we're going to put in. And then we're going to credit our common stock and then potentially any additional paid-in capital that goes into it, which in this case we won't have because we're going to issue it at par. All right, so our retained earnings, we're issuing a 50% stock dividend. So right now we have 50,000 shares. 50% of that says we're going to add another 25,000 shares. So 25,000 at $10 par, that's how much I'm going to be putting into my retained earnings. 25,000 shares at $10 par, that's $250,000. And that is the par value, because that's what you have to do it at when it's over 25%. So we don't even need this. So let's go down and answer some of these questions based on what we just did. All right, before the stock dividend, this first column here is just going to be real easy. It's just bringing the number straight down. We had common stock valued at 500,000. And let's go ahead and put them all in, these first numbers. We had 200,000, it said, for the additional paid-in capital. And then retained earnings, 660. And number of common shares outstanding was 50,000. All right, common stock. What happened? Impact of the stock dividend. Well, basically the journal entry says we added another 250,000 because of the dividend. And so my total is $750,000. I didn't put anything on this one into the excess of par, so it's still at 200,000. Retained earnings, I go back to my journal entry, I debited my retained earnings, so that's subtracting 250,000. So the impact of the dividend was a negative 250,000. What that leaves me then is a balance. You take 250,000 less the 660, you get 410 left. And look how that worked out. My total stockholders' equity, 1.36. After the stock dividend, it's still 1.36. I just took money out of one account and put it into somewhere else. That's basically all that happened within the same category. We had an extra 25,000 shares, so a total of 75,000 shares of stock. Now, before we do step 2, let's go ahead and check. Okay, good. Everything looks good. Now, step 2 says, instead of doing the stock split, we're now doing a 3-for-2 stock split. So for every 2 shares you have, you now have 3. So another way to think about it is a 1.5 for every 1. So you're gaining a half a share, an extra half a share. All right, instead of the dividend, answer these questions. All right, so let's go to requirement number 2. All of our numbers are still the same. We had 500,000. We had 200,000 in my additional paid-in capital and 660 in retained earnings. Total shares, 50,000. Now, whenever there's a stock split, remember there's no journal entry. So nothing happened here. My common stock is still at 500,000. I didn't do a journal entry. My paid in capital is still 200. This is still 0. This 0. Oops. Retained earnings, nothing. Still 660. Nothing. Total number of shares outstanding, that did change. And that went to 25,000 more shares. Because remember, it was 1.5 split. So they got an extra half a share, so half of the total. So this is the only number that stayed the same. Nothing else would have changed. That's what a stock split does. It doesn't do anything to your books. There's no journal entry. All it does is increases the number of shares and decreases their par value. Basically what they're worth, in a sense, even in the market. All right, the next one I have listed is number 6 and 7. Actually, 5, 6, and 7. So that's this. These 3 are kind of go together. All right, so these numbers we're gonna kind of memorize again. We got, let's get these in our head. $10 par again. We've got 60,000 outstanding, paid in capital and retained earnings. All right, so on the 5th, we're gonna give out a 20% stock dividend. And this is different now. This is stock dividend, and it's only 20%. So we're going to use the value of the actual market price, not the par value in this case, because it's less than 25%. We're going to give it to the people who are record holders as of the 15th, and then we're actually going to pay it on the 28th. The stock market is valued, or the shares is $40 on the date. That's the one we're going to use. And the stock market value is $33.40 on, okay. So let's do the entry. So the first one here is record the declaration of the 20% stock dividend. So we're doing 20% of this. That's how many shares are outstanding. We're giving out an extra 20%. 20% of that is 12,000 shares. And we're going to do it at the market price because it's less than 25%. The market price on the day, that's the one this is the one we want to use, $40. So if I use 40 times 12,000, that's the amount of my dividend. So 480,000. So we're going to debit our retained earnings for the 480,000. And we're not going to debit common stock yet. We're going to debit something very similar that says common stocks almost. Common stock dividend distributable, because we aren't giving out the money yet. And notice I didn't call this a dividends payable because it's not actually cash. So we're giving out the par value. So typically we would have just credited common stock, but we're going to do the same thing, but just not quite yet. We're not going to do the common stock. We're doing the distributable. 12,000 shares at $10 par. So 12,000 times 10 is 120. And we can go ahead and then do the regular paid in capital of excess of par for the difference. So this would be 360,000. And then all we've got to do is show that on the 28th, when we actually give out the stock, all we're going to do is debit this distributable. It's no longer distributable because I'm actually giving it out as common stock. And common stock, remember, it had a $10 par value in our example up above. So that's what we're going to credit. Okay, so that takes us now to number 6. Number 6 is using the same information. What's different here is they actually look at it from a stockholder standpoint. It says the stockholder, one stockholder owns 800 shares out of the 60,000 before the stock dividend. And we're going to compute the book value of this per share, and then the total book value immediately before and after. All right. So the book value per share before. Book value per share is simply, remember I had this in the very last piece of my notes from the lecture. All you got to do is take total stockholders' equity and divide that by the number of shares outstanding, so 60,000. So before, book value per share is 26.25. And then this is total book value of his shares, the guy who has 800. So simply just take the 26.25 times 800, 21,000. Now what we're going to see then is after the stock dividend, his book value of shares should be, in a sense, about the same. It'll be a little bit just due to rounding and just having numbers a little bit off, but it'll be real close to 21,000. Let's see. So the book value per share after the stock dividend. So after the stock dividend, remember, total stockholders' equity doesn't change because you're just moving some numbers around. We just moved them from here to here, you know, retained earnings up to common stock. What does change, though, is the number of shares issued. We've added now another 12,000 shares. So what we're going to do is take our 1575. That number doesn't change when we issue a stock dividend. But we're going to divide that now by 72,000 shares because we added another 12,000. So the book value per share went down, 21.75. However, the number of shares that this guy owns, he got an extra 20% more. So 20% of 800 is 160. So he now has 960 shares. So if I take this new share price, which went down, but he made up for it by having more shares. Look at that, it came out to be exactly the same. Check the work, it should verify that. Now we're ready for the last piece. What we have here, compute the total market value of the investor's shares in part 2. Okay, so the market value, let's do that. It's at 40 bucks a share on February 5th before, and he has 800 of shares. So market value is 32,000. Now the market value, since there's more shares out there, the market value will drop, just supply and demand, basic economics. It's now at 33.40, but he has 960 shares. He has more shares at a little bit lower price. And look how close it comes out to being the same, essentially the same, 32,064. And let me check our work, and that should show that we got that. Yep, 32,064.